Hi everyone. So in our last lecture, we talked about how games are made up of mechanics. But how do mechanics relate to each other? And what do mechanics have to do with the other elements of a game, like the art and the story? Today, we're going to talk about one of the most popular metaphors that game designers use to think about how game mechanics work together, along with formal elements and the social contexts in which games are created. Today, we're talking about games as systems. Why talk about games as systems? Maybe the easiest way to think about this is to imagine the human body. The organs in our bodies are all interconnected. They interact with each other in specific ways with the goal of performing the functions necessary to keep us alive. Basically, the human body is a life system. Games are also systems. Like the organs in our body, elements of games interact with each other in specific ways. Some mechanics are more central to the functioning of a game than others. These are often called core mechanics. But what makes a game unique is the way that the elements within it connect to each other. If you change one mechanic, one formal element, or one rule, you can end up with an entirely different game. Objects are the variables or parts within the system. Attributes are the properties of those objects and of the system itself. What can each object do? What can't it do? Internal relationships are the ways the objects relate to each other. For example, their distance from each other, whether they can attack each other, and so on. Finally, the environment is the context in which the game exists. Just like the environments in which we grow up affect our bodies, the context in which a game is created, and the knowledge and ideas about it that players bring to a play session, impact how that game is played. But we can also understand game systems in three different ways. Usually as designers, we focus on the formal system of games, in which the objects are game pieces or characters, the attributes are what they can do, and so on. But we can also think about games as experiential systems. In this case, instead of focusing on game mechanics and pieces, we would focus on the specific forms of interaction and emotion that the game facilitates. Finally, scholars and critics who analyze games often consider games as cultural systems. Here we would focus on the cultural forces that led to the game's creation and popularity, the communities and fandoms that have built around it, and its impact on popular culture and society, more broadly. Whichever way you choose to look at games, though, you have to remember the other ways as well. Formal systems exist within social and cultural contexts. Experiential systems are heavily impacted by formal elements like mechanics, and cultural systems develop around the experiences created by a game. Anyways, all of this is covered in more detail in your readings. But the question is, why do we as designers care about thinking about games systemically? I'll give you 3 reasons. First, thinking systemically will improve your design process. I think we've all played a game in which the visuals or the story feel tacked on, or the mechanics take us out of the story instead of immersing us more within it. In my experience, this happens because designers think of the story as separate from the mechanics, like the icing on a cake, when actually, the story is more like our skin. It seems surface level, but without it, the whole thing falls apart. Thinking systemically, we have to develop the story and mechanics at the same time, so that they reinforce each other in service of a specific experience. Even when you're thinking only about mechanics, thinking systemically forces you to consider how changing one mechanic could change the balance of your entire game. It requires more work, but it's more than worth it. Second, thinking systemically makes you think about players. For the rest of the month after reading week, we'll be focusing on the ways that players impact the games we make. Often, players bring unexpected ideas and experiences into our games, and sometimes they play them in ways that we couldn't have imagined before. For designers, this can be scary, especially if we spend a ton of time focusing closely on the formal system of the game. We don't want players breaking our game or coming away with an impression of the game that we didn't intend. But thinking about games as experiential systems can help alleviate this fear. Rather than seeing the social and personal experience of our players as a potential disruption to our carefully constructed formal system, we can look at it as an opportunity for our game to create a unique experience each time it's played. And we can start talking about the people we want to play our games, the people who will feel like our game is made for them, and the kinds of experiences we do and don't want to create. Finally, thinking systemically forces us to face the political and social implications of our games. It's easy enough to think of games as a fun collection of activities or mechanics. But when we think of games as cultural systems, we have to ask ourselves what they do in the broader social landscape around us. Some of this is contingent on the specific moment when they're released, but it also depends on the kinds of experiences we decide to make and why we choose to make those experiences in particular. Within specific cultural contexts, games can make us think differently about political issues, give people the space to create new creative communities, or help create the conditions for social change. They can also facilitate marginalization, abuse, and state repression. It's a lot to think about right now when you've only just handed in your first game assignment, and we'll be talking about this more later in the semester. But for now, suffice to say that the experiences you choose to focus on, the emotions you want to create in your players, and the systems you use to structure those experiences, these all exist within a broader culture. This culture affects you by influencing the games you want to create, and you in turn have the power to influence it through your game design practice. And that's my lesson for this week. Your prompts this week are a little bit longer and more involved than usual, but thankfully you have a whole 2 weeks to complete them with the break. I also want you to take a little bit of extra time during the break to really think about what it means to understand games systemically and in context. It can be hard to think about your game so broadly when you're used to only thinking about the formal elements of the things that you create, but it's really important both for you as a designer and for games culture more broadly. And with that, I hope you have a great break. I look forward to seeing you all again at the end of it.